Some people spend years believing that addiction is only a repeated mistake. Others notice something different happening. One day, the force behind the impulse simply weakens, as if someone had switched off a part of the body and the soul. Nothing feels the same. Pleasure loses its shine. The will collapses. The cycle continues, yet something inside seems to have been cut at the root. Why does this happen exactly to those who try to change? Why do certain individuals feel a silent calling inside the chaos while others remain asleep? Why does an inner interruption appear, as if the heavens themselves had placed an invisible boundary? Carl Jung believed that moments of rupture do not come to destroy a person, but to tear them away from an automatic path and reveal a truth the ego could never see alone. When God cuts something, it is not to punish, it is to awaken. The real question is simple. What is he trying to show when the power of the addiction begins to lose its grip? There is a moment in every person's journey when what once brought relief becomes the very thing that suffocates. The substance that promised escape starts building walls instead of opening doors. What begins as a choice transforms into a compulsion so subtle that the mind refuses to see the shift happening. The body craves, the soul protests. Yet the cycle continues because stopping feels like dying. Jung understood that human beings seek pleasure not for joy, but for forgetting. We run toward anything that silences the inner voice demanding change. The temporary high becomes a refuge from the unbearable weight of becoming who we truly are. Every time the substance enters the system, it creates a false sense of peace, a manufactured moment where the chaos inside seems to pause. But that pause costs everything. It costs presence. It costs growth. It costs the future self waiting to emerge. The trap reveals itself slowly. At first, the sensation feels like freedom. The edges of reality soften. Problems dissolve. The heart rate slows or speeds depending on what the body needs to forget. Time bends. Connection fades. And in that space, there is a whisper of relief so powerful that the mind marks it as survival. The brain remembers this pathway and begins to crave it with the same intensity it once craved food or water. What was once recreational becomes medicinal. What was medicinal becomes essential. What was essential becomes the only thing that feels real. But here is the truth most people refuse to face. The substance is not the real addiction. The substance is the symptom. What a person truly craves is the absence of self. They crave the moment when the inner critic goes silent, when shame loses its voice, when the burden of consciousness lifts just enough to breathe. The chemical is simply the tool. The real prison is the need to escape from a life that feels too painful to face without numbing. Jung called this the shadow, the parts of ourselves we refuse to acknowledge, the emotions we bury, the trauma we deny, the shame we carry in silence. When these elements pile up inside the psyche, they create unbearable pressure. The mind searches desperately for a release valve, and the substance becomes that valve. It offers a temporary exit from the internal war. But every exit is a trap. Every escape deepens the cage. The body adapts. Tolerance builds. What once required a small amount now demands more. The high becomes shorter. The crash becomes longer. The person begins chasing a feeling that no longer exists. They are not seeking pleasure anymore. They are seeking the memory of pleasure. They are trying to return to that first moment when the substance made everything bearable. But that moment is gone forever. The brain has changed. The receptors have dulled. The magic has turned into mechanics. And still, the cycle continues. Why? Because stopping means facing everything the substance helped avoid. Stopping means sitting in the rawness of reality without a buffer. It means feeling every ounce of pain that was postponed. It means confronting the person in the mirror and admitting that something fundamental needs to change. Most people are not ready for that confrontation. So they stay in the cage, convincing themselves that the bars are not really there. This is where the hidden part reveals itself. The cage is not made of the substance. The cage is made of fear. Fear of withdrawal, fear of failure, fear of discovering that even without the substance, the pain remains. Fear that sobriety will not bring the peace that was promised. Fear that the real problem is not the chemical, but the life that was built around it. Fear that change will cost too much. But there is something else happening beneath the surface, something the conscious mind cannot see. The soul begins to resist. It starts rejecting the false peace. The pleasure that once felt like heaven begins to feel hollow. The high becomes shorter and less satisfying. The body still craves, but something deeper inside starts pulling away. This is not willpower. This is not discipline. This is the self beginning to intervene. Jung believed the self is the deeper intelligence within every human being. It is the force that seeks wholeness, that pushes toward growth, that refuses to let the soul remain asleep forever. When a person is trapped in the cycle of dependence, the self watches and waits. It does not judge, it does not rush. But at a certain point, when the soul is ready for transformation, the self begins to cut the threads that bind the person to the substance. Not all at once, not obviously. But slowly the grip weakens, the desire fades, the compulsion loses its power. This is the beginning of the process. The pleasure that once felt like salvation starts to reveal itself as the cage it always was. And when that realization arrives, even if it arrives quietly, everything begins to shift. The person does not yet understand what is happening. They only know that something inside them is changing. The substance still calls, but the voice grows fainter. The craving still appears, but it lacks the same urgency. Something has been cut at the root, and the awakening has begun. The shift arrives without announcement. One day the pull is overwhelming, consuming every thought, dictating every action. The next day, something inside feels different. The craving does not scream as loudly. The obsession loosens its grip. The body still remembers the routine, but the intensity behind it has dimmed. There is no clear reason, no dramatic intervention, no moment of enlightenment, just a quiet change that the mind cannot explain. This is the moment most people misunderstand. They assume recovery requires effort, willpower, determination. They believe the battle against dependence is won through strength and discipline. But Jung saw something else entirely. He witnessed individuals who suddenly lost their desire for the substance without choosing to let it go. The compulsion simply faded. The magnetic pull weakened. The need evaporated like mist in sunlight, and when asked how it happened, they could not provide an answer. They only knew that something beyond their control had shifted inside them. This is not random. This is not luck. This is the self stepping in when the conscious mind has exhausted every strategy and failed. The ego tries to manage the dependence through rules, promises, bargains. It sets boundaries that collapse within hours. It creates plans that dissolve the moment the craving returns. It fights and fails, until it finally realizes it has no power over the force driving the behavior. And in that moment of complete surrender, the self begins its work. The cut happens in silence because it operates at a level deeper than thought. The mind cannot access it. The will cannot command it. The ego cannot take credit for it. This is why so many people describe the experience as feeling like grace. They wake up one morning and notice the craving has lost its teeth. The substance still exists in the world, but the internal hook connecting them to it has been removed. They are free, but they did not free themselves. Jung believed this was evidence of a higher intelligence at work within the human psyche. He called it the process of individuation, the journey toward becoming whole. When a person is stuck in a cycle that prevents growth, the self will eventually intervene to break the pattern. It does this not through force, but through a quiet dismantling of the structures holding the person captive. The chemical dependency is only the surface. Beneath it are layers of emotional wounds, false beliefs, unprocessed trauma. The self begins to dissolve these layers, and as they dissolve, the need for the substance dissolves with them. But here is what makes this process so strange. The person does not feel victorious. They feel confused. They expected the end of the craving to bring relief, celebration, a sense of accomplishment. Instead, they feel empty. The substance filled a space inside them, and now that space is hollow. The days feel longer, the silence feels louder. The absence of the high reveals the absence of everything else. No joy, no purpose, no direction. Just a vast openness that terrifies the mind. This emptiness is not a failure. It is the opening. The substance acted as a plug, blocking the person from experiencing the full range of their inner life. It muted pain, but it also muted meaning. It numbed suffering, but it also numbed presence. When the plug is removed, everything floods in. The grief that was postponed, the questions that were ignored, the loneliness that was hidden. The person stands in the wreckage of their former life and realizes that the substance was never the problem. It was the solution to a problem they never wanted to face. And now they must face it. The cut has happened. The craving is gone or fading. But the real work has only just begun. The mind panics because it has lost its primary coping mechanism. The body aches because it is recalibrating to a new baseline. The emotions surge because they are no longer being chemically suppressed. Everything the person avoided by using the substance now demands attention. This is why so many people relapse. Not because the craving returns with full force, but because the emptiness feels unbearable. Yet this is exactly where transformation begins. The silent cut is not the end of the journey, it is the threshold. The self has removed the obstacle, but it cannot walk the path for the person. That part requires conscious choice. The individual must decide whether to fill the emptiness with a new distraction or to sit in it long enough for something real to emerge. Most people choose distraction. They replace one substance with another. They trade chemical dependence for behavioral compulsion. They run from the void because the void feels like death. But those who stay, those who endure the silence and the emptiness, begin to notice something extraordinary. The space left behind by the substance starts to fill with something else, not immediately, not obviously, but gradually a new presence begins to form. It feels like clarity. It feels like stillness. It feels like a version of themselves they forgot existed. The person who lived beneath the dependence starts to surface, and for the first time in years, maybe decades, they catch a glimpse of who they were always meant to become. This is the hidden purpose of the cut. It is not just to remove the substance. It is to create space for the true self to emerge. The self knew the substance was blocking the path to individuation, so it severed the connection. But the space it left behind is sacred. It is the canvas on which the new life will be painted. And the person standing in that space must choose whether to paint something meaningful or to flee back into numbness. The craving may return from time to time. Old patterns do not disappear overnight. But when it does return, it lacks the same power. The person remembers the emptiness, they remember the silence, and they begin to realize that what they are craving is not the substance itself, but the escape it once provided. And escape is no longer what they need. What they need now is to move forward into the unknown territory ahead. When the substance leaves, it takes everything with it. Not just the high, not just the craving, but the entire structure the person built their life around. The routines collapse, the friendships fade, the identity shatters. What remains is a barren landscape where nothing grows and nothing moves. This is the desert. This is the place every recovering person must cross, and it is here that most turn back. The mind was not prepared for this emptiness. It expected relief. It expected freedom. It expected the removal of the substance to restore joy, purpose, connection. Instead, there is only silence. The days stretch on without meaning. The hours drag without direction. The person wakes up and realizes they have no idea what to do with themselves. Everything they once did revolved around the substance, every friendship, every activity, every moment of escape. Now that the center has been removed, the entire structure collapses inward. Jung warned that this void is not accidental. It is intentional. The self creates the desert because the desert forces confrontation. When there is nothing to distract, nothing to numb, nothing to chase, the person must finally face themselves. Not the version they pretended to be, not the story they told others, but the raw, unfiltered truth of who they are beneath all the layers of performance and pretense. This confrontation is terrifying because most people have spent their entire lives running from it. The desert reveals what was always there, but never acknowledged. The loneliness that existed long before the substance. The shame that has been carried since childhood. The fear of being seen, of being known, of being rejected. The belief that they are fundamentally broken and unworthy of love. These truths were buried under years of chemical comfort, but now they surface with brutal clarity. There is nowhere to hide, no escape route, no way to avoid the pain, and the pain is immense. It is not just the absence of pleasure, it is the presence of everything that was suppressed. Grief for the years lost, regret for the damage caused, guilt for the people hurt, anger at the circumstances that led to dependence in the first place. All of it arrives at once, flooding the system with emotions the person is not equipped to handle. The temptation to return to the substance becomes overwhelming. At least the substance made sense. At least it provided a predictable escape. This void offers nothing but suffering. But Jung believed suffering has purpose. It is not random. It is not punishment. It is the fire that burns away the false self. Every person constructs an identity based on external validation, societal expectations, survival strategies. This identity is not real. It is a mask worn to navigate the world without being destroyed by it. The substance became part of that mask, a tool used to maintain the illusion of control. But the self does not want the mask. It wants the truth. And the only way to reach the truth is to strip away everything false. The desert does this work. It removes all distractions. It eliminates all shortcuts. It forces the person to sit in their own skin and feel everything they tried to avoid. This process is excruciating. The mind begs for relief. The body aches for comfort. The emotions rage against the stillness. But the self does not intervene to end the suffering. It watches and waits. It knows that transformation requires descent. The person must go down into the depths of their own psyche and confront the shadows that have been ruling their life from the darkness. Most people do not make it through this stage. They reach the middle of the desert, look around at the endless emptiness, and decide to turn back. They convince themselves that sobriety is not worth this much pain. They tell themselves the substance was not that bad. They rationalize a return to the old life because the new life feels impossible. And so they go back. They pick up the substance again. They restart the cycle, and the opportunity for awakening is lost. But for those who continue walking, something begins to shift. The desert, which seemed infinite at first, starts to change. Not dramatically, not suddenly, but in small, almost imperceptible ways. A moment of clarity appears. A memory surfaces that reframes the past. A realization dawns that shifts the perspective. The person begins to see that the emptiness is not a punishment. It is a cleansing. Everything that was false is being burned away. Everything that was borrowed is being returned. Everything that was built on lies is being demolished. and beneath the rubble, something new starts to grow. It is fragile at first, a tiny spark of curiosity, a fleeting sense of possibility, a quiet voice that whispers, maybe, just maybe, there is something on the other side of this pain. The person does not trust this voice. They have been disappointed too many times, but the voice persists. It grows a little stronger each day. It begins to suggest that the desert is not the end. It is the middle. And beyond the middle lies something the person has never experienced before. This is where faith becomes necessary, not religious faith, but existential faith. The faith that the process has meaning, even when meaning is invisible. The faith that the self is guiding the journey, even when the path seems random. The faith that the suffering is not senseless, but purposeful. Jung called this the leap into the unknown, the moment when a person must choose to trust the process without evidence that it will lead anywhere good. This leap cannot be forced, it cannot be taught, it must be chosen. And when it is chosen, the desert begins to end. Not immediately, not all at once, but gradually the landscape shifts. The barrenness gives way to something new. The emptiness starts to fill with presence. The silence becomes less oppressive and more spacious. The person realizes they are no longer the same individual who entered the desert. Something fundamental has changed. The false self has been dismantled, the mask has been removed, and what remains is raw, vulnerable, and real. This is the gift of the desert. It strips away everything unnecessary and reveals what is essential. It takes the person apart so they can be reassembled in alignment with their true nature. The substance was blocking this process. The dependence was keeping the person locked in a false version of themselves. The self intervened, cut the attachment, and pushed the person into the desert so the real work could begin. And now, standing on the other side of the void, the person is ready for the next stage of the journey. If you feel ready to dive deeper into your own mind and balance both your light and shadow, explore the SIM Method ebook. It's a practical guide that helps you awaken your inner strength in just 5 minutes a day. The link is waiting for you in the first pinned comment. Not everyone experiences this process. Most people live their entire lives without ever being forced into the desert. They maintain their addictions, their distractions, their comfortable illusions until death. They are not bad people. They are not failures. They simply were not chosen for this particular path, but there are others who cannot escape it. No matter how hard they try to hold on to the substance, it is ripped away. No matter how desperately they cling to the old life, it crumbles. These are the ones being awakened. The first sign is unmistakable. The substance stops working, not gradually, but suddenly. What once brought euphoria now brings nothing. The high feels muted. The relief feels temporary. The escape feels hollow. The person increases the dose, chases the feeling harder, but nothing restores the original effect. The brain has changed. The body has adapted. But more importantly, the self has begun its intervention. It has flipped a switch deep in the psyche that makes the substance ineffective. The person does not understand why. They only know that something has fundamentally shifted. The second sign is isolation. Friends disappear. Relationships collapse. Connections that once felt solid dissolve without explanation. The person finds themselves alone more often, not by choice but by circumstance. Invitations stop coming. Conversations feel forced. The social world that revolved around the substance begins to fall away. This is not punishment. This is preparation. The self is removing external distractions so the person can turn inward. Awakening cannot happen in a crowd. It requires solitude. It requires the person to be alone with themselves long enough to hear the voice beneath the noise. The third sign is the collapse of meaning. Work feels pointless. Hobbies lose their appeal. Goals that once seemed important now feel arbitrary. The person goes through the motions of daily life, but feels completely disconnected from it. Nothing satisfies, nothing excites, nothing matters. This is not depression, though it resembles it. This is the death of the false self. The identity the person built around the substance is disintegrating, and with it goes all the meaning attached to that identity. The person is being hollowed out so something new can take root. The fourth sign is the emergence of questions, deep existential questions that have no easy answers. Why am I here? What is the point of any of this? Who am I without the substance? These questions are not intellectual exercises. They are soul-level inquiries that demand a response. The mind cannot answer them. The ego has no script for them. They arise from a deeper place, from the self, asking the person to wake up and see beyond the surface of their existence. These questions are uncomfortable. They disrupt sleep. They invade quiet moments. They refuse to be ignored. The fifth sign is synchronicity. Strange coincidences begin to appear. A book falls off a shelf with a message that feels personal. A stranger says something that echoes an internal struggle. A song plays on the radio with lyrics that mirror the person's exact situation. Jung believed synchronicity was evidence of the self communicating through the external world. When a person is being awakened, the universe conspires to guide them. Not in obvious ways, but in subtle patterns that the conscious mind can barely perceive. These moments cannot be explained logically, but they feel undeniably significant. The sixth sign is the loss of control. The person tries to manage their life, to hold everything together, but every attempt fails. Plans collapse, strategies backfire, efforts to regain stability only create more chaos. This is not bad luck. This is the self dismantling the structures the ego built to maintain the illusion of control. Awakening cannot happen while the person believes they are in charge. The ego must be humbled. The will must be broken. Only then can the person surrender to the deeper intelligence guiding their transformation. The seventh sign is physical symptoms. Exhaustion that sleep does not cure, aches that doctors cannot explain, a heaviness in the chest that feels like grief but has no clear source. The body is processing the changes happening in the psyche. It is releasing old energy, old patterns, old identities stored in the tissues and cells. This discomfort is not illness. It is recalibration. The entire system is being reset to align with the emerging self. The process is uncomfortable, but it is necessary. The eighth sign is the pull towards solitude and nature. The person feels drawn to quiet places, forests, mountains, water, anywhere away from people and noise. This is the soul seeking refuge. The external world has become too loud, too chaotic, too overwhelming. The person needs space to hear the inner voice that has been drowned out for so long. Nature provides that space. It offers a mirror for the internal transformation. The stillness of the forest reflects the stillness the person must cultivate within. The flow of the river reflects the surrender they must embrace. The ninth sign is dreams. Vivid, strange, often disturbing dreams that linger long after waking. Jung believed dreams were messages from the unconscious, attempts by the self to communicate what the conscious mind refuses to see. During awakening, dreams become more frequent and more intense. They show the person their shadows, their wounds, their potential. They offer guidance in symbolic form. The person may not understand the dreams immediately, but they sense their importance. Something is trying to be revealed. The 10th sign is the knowing. A deep, inexplicable certainty that this suffering has purpose, that the loss of the substance was not random, that the pain is not meaningless. This knowing does not come from logic, it comes from the soul. It is a quiet voice beneath the chaos that whispers, "Keep going." The person does not know where they are being led, but they sense they are being led somewhere. This knowing is fragile. It can be drowned out by fear and doubt, but it persists. And for those who listen, it becomes the thread that guides them through the darkness. These signs do not appear all at once. They emerge over time, layering on top of each other, building into a pattern that cannot be ignored. When enough of these signs are present, the person begins to realize that something larger is at work. They are not just recovering from dependence. They are being called toward a different way of existing. The substance was the barrier, and now that it is gone, the real journey can begin. But the journey requires recognizing the signs. It requires seeing the disruption not as a curse, but as an invitation. And it requires the courage to say yes to a process that offers no guarantees, only the possibility of becoming whole. Every person walks through life wearing a mask, not intentionally, not maliciously, but out of necessity. The world demands conformity, and survival requires adaptation. From childhood, the message is clear: be what others need you to be. Suppress what makes you different, hide what makes you vulnerable, and so the false self is born. It is the version of you designed to be acceptable, to be loved, to be safe, but it is not real, and the substance became the tool that allowed the false self to function. Without the substance, the mask begins to crack. The performance becomes exhausting. The pretense feels unbearable. The person realizes they have been living someone else's life, speaking someone else's words, chasing someone else's dreams. The false self was built on fear, shame, and the desperate need for approval. It worked for a while. It kept the person functional, but it also kept them disconnected from their true nature. And now that the substance is gone, the false self can no longer hold itself together. This collapse feels like death, because in many ways it is. The identity the person clung to for years is disintegrating. The roles they played no longer fit. The stories they told themselves no longer make sense. The beliefs they held as truth reveal themselves as lies. Everything they thought they knew about who they are falls apart, and in the wreckage there is nothing to hold on to, no solid ground, no clear direction, just the terrifying realization that they have no idea who they actually are. Jung called this ego death, the moment when the constructed self is demolished to make room for the authentic self. The ego fights this process with everything it has. It screams, it resists, it tries to rebuild the old identity. It searches desperately for something to cling to, some new mask to wear. But the self will not allow it. The false self must die completely. There can be no compromise, no halfway point. The person must descend into the void and remain there until every trace of the false identity has been burned away. This is why the process is so painful. It is not just the loss of the substance, it is the loss of the self. The person mourns the version of themselves they thought they were. They grieve the life they thought they were living. They feel the weight of wasted years spent performing instead of being. The shame is overwhelming. The regret is crushing. The sense of failure is absolute. And there is no one to blame but themselves. The false self was their creation, and now they must witness its destruction. But beneath the pain, something else is happening. The true self is beginning to stir. It's been buried for so long, suppressed beneath layers of conditioning and trauma. It has been silenced by the substance, by the distractions, by the constant noise of a life lived on autopilot. But now, in the silence left by the collapse of the false self, it starts to wake up. At first, it is just a whisper, a fleeting sense of something deeper, a moment of clarity that disappears as quickly as it came, but gradually it grows stronger. The true self does not announce itself with fanfare. It does not arrive fully formed. It emerges slowly, cautiously, like a wild animal that has been trapped for years and is now testing the boundaries of its freedom. It shows itself in small ways: a preference that was ignored, a value that was buried, a desire that was shamed, a truth that was denied. These fragments begin to surface, and the person realizes they have been living in opposition to themselves. Everything they built was designed to keep the true self hidden. And now that the false self is gone, there is finally space for the truth to emerge. But the truth is uncomfortable. It does not align with the life the person created. It demands change. It requires letting go of relationships that were based on the false self. It means walking away from careers that served the mask but suffocate the soul. It means admitting that the person they pretended to be was a lie, and the person they actually are is someone they barely know. This realization is destabilizing. The mind panics. The ego searches for a way to retreat. But there is no going back. The false self is dead, and the only path forward is through the unknown. This stage requires surrender, not giving up, but letting go. The person must release their attachment to who they thought they were and allow themselves to become who they actually are. This is terrifying because it offers no guarantees. The false self was predictable. It was safe. It was known. The true self is none of these things. It is wild, it is unpredictable, it is raw, and it demands authenticity in a world that punishes authenticity. Yet this is where freedom lives. The false self was a prison disguised as safety. It kept the person contained, controlled, acceptable, but it also kept them disconnected from life, from joy, from meaning. The true self, though vulnerable and uncertain, is alive in a way the false self never was. It feels, it desires, it creates, it connects. It exists without apology. And once the person tastes that existence, even for a moment, they realize they can never go back to the mask. The death of the false self is not the end of the journey. It is the beginning. The person stands in the rubble of their former life, unsure of what comes next. They are no longer who they were, but they are not yet who they will become. They are in the space between identities, the threshold between the old life and the new. And in that space, transformation happens. Not all at once, not painlessly, but inevitably. The false self had to die so the true self could be born. And now, with nothing left to hide behind, the person must finally learn to live as themselves. The question is no longer why the addiction was taken from you. The question is, what will you do with the freedom that remains?